Well, hello, Destiny. Are you there? Destiny, hello. Well, hello, everyone. I don't know if Destiny can hear me. As you can tell, we have started using a new platform for our live stream. And let me make sure that us.
Destiny, can you hear me? Are you good?
I'm good
Can you hear
now.
me?
Yes.
Okay. Perfect. So welcome, Destiny. Sorry, had a little hiccup there.
Thank you, Lee. How are you?
I am good. So as everybody can tell, we are using a new little platform and making our show a little bit fancier. And so thank you all for joining us today. We're very excited to have you. Destiny, I hope you're doing well, and you will introduce our first guest.
Yes. Our first guest, it's going to be a special treat for you. We have Kuntrell Jackson. He is an activist, actor, and also an author, which we'll be discussing a little bit today about his book that he has written, and also just to share a little bit about his story. He was represented by Brian Stevenson, the lawyer who Just Mercy was based off when he was wrongly convicted and on death row. So I'm excited to have Kuntrell here, especially since this platform is for young adults, and also not only is he an actor, but he's an author. So we're excited to learn a little bit more about your book and also for you to talk about it. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. Thank y'all for having me. It's just a blessing that I was able to be free. Yes, of course, like you said, Brian Stevenson was my attorney, the Equal Justice Initiative. In 2012, they took my case to the United States Supreme Court, and they ruled it was unconstitutional to send the juveniles to life without parole in prison. So what that means was every juvenile ever sentenced to life without parole is mandatory that they go back to court and get resentenced. So many of us have been freed, others still waiting the process to be freed. Blessings. I got out, I started going around sharing my story, telling my story. So everybody kept on asking me, man, why don't you write a book? You should write a book. And I'm like, nah, that ain't for me. I don't like all that writing. So they was just like, man, I'm telling you, it'll be more powerful. I brushed them off. So maybe like 7 months after all of the constantly asking me, I just started writing, and it took me like 5 months to finish that book. I finished the book in 5 months. I released it in April of this year. So that's how that happened.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Yeah, and for our audience out there, tell us a little bit about what the book's about and a little bit about your experience. A lot of people may not know about your experience. So enlighten our audience about you.
Well, I'm just a little old country. The book is about my childhood, growing up, all the way until the day I got out of prison. A lot of people probably think my book is based on prison, but it's not. That's why my book called Pain, but it's through all the pain I still evolve. Because a lot of people, when they meet me and they hear my story, they only hear it seems like they only hear the 16 and a half years in prison, the life without parole, but they forget that I was 14 years old before I got incarcerated. And I tell people, the 14 years I was on the streets were worse than the 16 and a half years in prison for me. So that's why my book called Pain, because I take you through my pain from the very first day I can remember. I was 4 years old, and my mama was taking me and my sister that's a year above me a bath together. She had both of us in the tub. And as she washing us up, my other sister, she run in the bathroom and she just like, mama, hollering and screaming, so my mama, she just take out running. So after a little while, my sister in the tub with me, she say, Kuntrell, stay right here, don't move. And she put a towel around me and she left. And I didn't want to be in there by myself, so I left. But as I'm walking down the hallway, before I can even make it to the living room, I heard a loud shot, boom. And I froze because it was so loud. Right. So what happened was my mom, my sister, my older sister and brother, I'm the baby of 5 kids. So my older sisters and brothers was out fighting the neighbors' kids. So the parents came out and they was holding my brother down, letting their kids beat up my brother. So my mama told them, let my son go. And I don't know, I guess they thought my mama was playing. My mama shot one of the neighbors. And they took my mama away from me, and it was like the worst thing that ever could happen to me, because I went to live with my grandmother when they took her. And then when I was living with her, my grandmother died. She died. So I had to go stay with my aunt. And when I went to live with my aunt, it was the worst experience ever. Like my aunt, she just abused me. Like she did things to me that was unheard of that any person would do to a child. And it was just hell, she tortured me daily. That lady just tortured me. And, I stayed with her for a while. My mom did a year. She did a year. So my grandma, she died like soon as my mama went to prison. So you can imagine I had hell for almost a year. My mama finally got out of prison. So when my mom got out of prison, that was like the best feeling in the world, because I knew I wasn't going to be punished no more. And you got to keep in mind, I'm 5, 6 years old. And my mama got out. But when my mama got out, her and my stepdad, they got together. So my mama used to smoke weed. My stepdad, he was an alcoholic. So every weekend, he always get drunk and he always want to come in. Now, we was already poor. We were struggling. We ain't had nothing. We had no money. Our lights used to get cut off. Water used to get cut off. We were constantly moving from house to house because we couldn't afford to pay the rent. We was getting kicked out. So we ain't got nothing. We stand with family members. So my stepdad, he'll come in the house drunk, and he always wanted to tear up things like the tables, punch holes in the wall. And we already poor, So it was a worse experience. It was a terrible experience. And then as the time go on, my brother, he shoot somebody when I was 11 years old. He go to prison. He stay in prison 6 years. But through all of this going on, I never had nobody come to me and say, Kuntrell, what's going on with you? What's wrong? Because I was in school, I was fighting. And the reason I was fighting is because we had terrible clothes and shoes. I had holes and stuff in my shoes and clothes. So I was the type of person, instead of talking to the other kids, I'd rather play the back, because I didn't want people noticing me so they can laugh at my wardrobe, but kids gonna be kids. They spot me, they talk about me, I punch them. So that's how I end up fighting. It's crazy. So I started getting in trouble, but I was really acting out because of the poverty. And no one never came to me and asked me like, Kuntrell, what's going on? What you want? How can I help you? What you need? If they did, people would have knew. All I wanted was my daddy. I didn't want nothing else. I just wanted my daddy. I never knew him growing up. My mom pointed him out to me one day, and when she pointed him out to me, it's like as soon as she did that, I started seeing him more, just, you know, passing by or somewhere, I started seeing his car. And, you know, I just wanted him, and I'm like, man, why dude don't want me like what I ever did? You know, I just wanted my dad. You know, I used to watch all these movies, how, you know, the father's supposed to be there for the son, and I just wanted him, you know, he was never there. And what happened was I got a little older. I got probably 12 or 13 years old. And now it never felt his absence, but I started hanging in the streets with my homeboy. So it made me forget about him. You know, it took my mind off him. So what I did was I'm hanging with them. Now we stealing, we candy bars, cookies, and, you know, little small stuff. We weren't doing nothing major. We just used to be stealing. But we run in the streets, you know, 12 o'clock at night, I come in the house, you know, 13, 14, I ain't supposed to be doing this. But it was taking my mind on my daddy because I wanted him. That's how the tragic night happened. You know, I'm hanging in the projects with my homeboys, and, you know, we get into it with another group of dudes. So we leave the projects, and as we walking, you know, one of my friend, he was like, man, y'all want to rob movie mansion? I'm like, nah, we ain't for the rob no store. You know, that ain't what we do. He was like, man, come on, we're going to get away with it. I'm like, man, you ain't talking about nothing. So my cousin, as we get close to the store, my cousin, he see that it's only one person in the store. And the conversation come up again. So now my cousin, he with it because he feel like we gonna get away. So I'm telling him, man, y'all, we ain't finna rob no store. So my cousin, he say, man, look, you ain't even gotta go in, man. Just stand outside. Don't let nobody walk up on me. I never told him yeah, and I never told him no. But granted, this is my cousin. You know what I'm gonna do. I ain't gonna let nobody walk up on him. Not saying that I'm participating in their activity. I just ain't gonna let nobody walk up on my cousin. I really thought they was playing. So they go in the store after what seems like a long time. Finally, I see my homeboy, he pulled a gun. Keep in mind, I thought that they was just joking. So when he pulled the gun, I was like, man, I didn't panic, but I panicked. So I opened the door, and I took one step in the store, and I said, man, I thought y'all was just playing. Boom, he shot him, he killed him. I think my voice scared him. I don't know, you know, but soon as I opened the door and I said that he shot and he killed him, we ran. I got life without parole because of a decision I made to stand outside that store instead of keep walking. That's how I ended up in prison with 16 and a half years. With life without parole, I did 16 and a half years. By the grace of God, he blessed me and EJI to cross paths, and, you know, Brian Stevenson and EJI took my case, and we made history. Yes.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And all of this can be found in your book, and you are here with us, and you were in the movie Just Mercy as well. So how was that experience for you to be a part of that?
Man, you know what's crazy? And I don't know if people believe me when I tell them this, but I always wanted to act since I was little. You know, New Jack City was my favorite movie. And that's how I started wanting to act. You know, I used to see Wesley Snipes, you know, he was Nino Brown. Not minus the drug dealing and the killing part, but what he did, what I used to see him doing, how he used to always give back to the community, like giving them money, feeding people on Thanksgiving, giving little kids money. So I used to be like, I'm gonna do that. I'm gonna be like that one day. So I was always Nino Brown, you know, and I always acted out his scenes. So Wesley Snipes became my favorite actor. So I started doing everything Wesley Snipes did in the movies. I just wanted to be like Wesley Snipes. So I always wanted to act. But then I got life without parole, and it was like gone. And then where I come from, you know, you can't really tell people that I want to be an actor, I want to be a doctor. They'll laugh at you like, man, go on, because it wasn't seen or did in my environment. It wasn't. So that I just kept it in, you know. For me, I was destined to get killed or go to jail, you know. that's all my environment had offered me. So yeah, man, I got out and I was like, man, I'm finna do this acting stuff. So I enrolled in college. You know, I'm a theater major in college. So I was doing it. Next thing you know, Brian's like, they about to make a movie in me. You want to be in it? Like, do I want to what? Ask me that. So I got my opportunity. Of course, I killed it. Yeah, man, that's how it was awesome, man. It was so fun, man. Just, you know, working with Michael B. Jordan and Jamie Foxx. It was cool, man. It was cool.
Yeah, that had to have been some kind of experience.
Yeah.
That's awesome. I know you have to go in like 4 minutes, and I wanted to fit a couple questions in. One, you're an activist now based off of your experience, and I know Lee and I and you talked behind the scenes a couple of weeks ago, and you hit on a lot of the issues of the root causes that can lead someone to prison. So I just want you to share a little bit of your journey of being an activist, and also for your closing remark, can you give some encouraging words to youth, and particularly Black and Brown youth who might be in similar situations or might be in a similar environment that you might have grown up in, just to give them a word of encouragement and before you go?
Yeah, you know, I go around, I got out, and I knew my purpose was to get out here and save as many kids as possible. You know, I know that these children are our future. I know this. So it's like everybody that I see they looking up to is misleading them, misguiding them. They ain't doing nothing to really help these kids. So it's like, I'm gonna take my story, I'm gonna take my experience, and I'm gonna go back to the children that look like me and come from where I come from, even the white kids that, you know, they families did whatever to the people that look like me. And I'm gonna tell my story, and I'm gonna share some things with them to inspire and motivate them to come up and, you know, take the offices that these people with power have so they can change what we going through. You know, I tell them, you know, I already done paid for it for y'all. So let me be enough example to make y'all not go down the path I went down. So that's what I do. You know, I go around speaking to kids. You know, I help in any type of way I can with the children, with the youth. You know, that's my biggest thing I do right now besides acting. But that's what I do. To just some encouraging words. You know, we all see what's happening. We see what's going on. We know what happened. You know, but a lot of us don't know the history. You know, and if we don't know the history, it's going to keep repeating itself. So I challenge y'all to get out and learn this history, learn about what happened to us, learn about what they did to us, you know, teach it, you know, when you teach it, have these conversations about it. When you have these conversations about it, it'll become easier to discuss it amongst the other race, you know. And once we do that, I already see that a lot of people, they tired of what's been happening. You know, I see white people coming together with black people, and they doing things now. So I just want y'all to understand what happened to me. It was real. You know, that's not a myth. It wasn't a game. Like, I actually did 16 and a half years. I got sentenced to die in prison at 14. And it was all because of my skin, because they knew that I didn't kill nobody. A couple months before that happened, you know, 2 white kids went to the school. They pulled a fire alarm. Kids and the teachers run out. They start unload. They kill 5 people and they injure 10. They get sentenced till they were 18 to 21 years old in juvenile detention. So they let you know that my skin played a major part in me getting sentenced to die in prison, and I didn't do anything. It's real. Please learn the history. Please educate yourself, but don't just educate yourself. Use the education, teach it, execute with it, you know, learn politics. Go take these offices that these people with power in, because those are the people that make it hard on us. You know, learn who you voting for. You know, use your right to vote, but don't just use your right to vote to say I vote to get a sticker. Get proximity to the person that you voting for, because these people are going to be the ones over you, calling shots, you know, determine what happens. So learn who you voting for, you know. And it starts with your sheriff, with your senate, with your mayor, you know, your governor. It ain't just president, you know, it starts with all these people. So the one thing I want to leave y'all is learn this information, share this information, talk about it every day, talk about it. And yeah, let's help these youth, man. Let's get together and let's do it.
Thank you, Kuntrell. And before I close this out, Lee, do you have any parting words for our
Just
guests?
amen to that. Amen. Thank you so much for being here with us.
Thank y'all for having me, man.
Yes. Thank you. You lifted up two things that I want to reiterate. One, local elections matter. We know that this is a presidential year, but your local elections, like Kuntrell was saying, really matter. So those are the decisions that affect you day to day. And two, if you want to find a great resource to educate yourself, I actually met Kuntrell last year in Montgomery, Alabama, when I was visiting the Equal Justice Initiative. And that is a great place if you want to take a pilgrimage to learn about the history that Kuntrell is talking about, and also to hear from other stories of inmates who were also wrongly convicted and is waiting their process to be free. So Kuntrell, thank you so much for making time for us. I know you got to run to your next engagement. We appreciate you. God bless. If there's anything that Lee and I can do for you, you know, reach out, let us know. Buy his book.
Thank you.
Buy his book. It's interesting. The link to his book is on our social media pages. And God bless you, and thank you for coming.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Well, Destiny?
Lee, that was great. I'm excited to have Kuntrell, but I'm also excited to talk to our next guest as well, to dig deep into the issues and the policies. So
I know. So we are going to be welcoming our friends, our new friends, and some old friends. Stacy Rector and Josh Spickler. Is that correct? Awesome. There we go. We're still learning this new format. But welcome, y'all, for being here. And we are going to invite each of you to introduce yourself so we don't get anything wrong. We usually put that on our guests to kind of introduce themselves. So, Stacy, we'll start with you.
All right. Well, thank you all so much for having me. I really enjoyed Kuntrell and what he had to share. Powerful. Hopefully we can dig into a little bit more about sort of how those things happen and what we can do to change things. But I'm Stacy Rector. I'm the director of Tennesseans for Alternatives to the Death Penalty. We are an organization in Tennessee that works across the state to educate people about all of the problems with the death penalty and why we need to end it. And we try to give folks information and tools so that they can be a part of that change. And so we're really excited to be here and tell you more about it.
Awesome. And Josh?
Yeah, I'm the executive director of an organization called Just City in Memphis, also in Tennessee. And we work closely with Stacy. You'll hear more about that in a minute. And I'm an attorney by training, and I was part of a team that started Just City about 5 years ago. I was working in the public defender's office at the time, and we began Just City to try to bring some light on the issues that Kuntrell just talked a lot about, and do it through a lens that was a little different from the one our community and our state, frankly, is used to. And we want to make a criminal justice system that is smaller, that is fairer, that is more humane to the people who come in contact with it. And so we've been doing a whole lot of work over the last 5 years trying to make that happen, but we have a whole lot of work left to do.
Yeah, definitely. And I did want each of you to kind of speak to a little bit about what you are doing, because I know your work is a little bit different from one another, but it's also connected, specifically being in Tennessee, which I am in Tennessee as well. My co-host here is just north of us in Indiana. But I know this is a national conversation that needs to be had, but just asking you right now, like, what are you seeing right now in Tennessee and maybe nationally when it comes to the issues of mass incarceration and when it comes to the issues of the death penalty? I know that's been a lot in the news recently when federal executions have started, and we're talking about COVID-19 specifically with prison populations. So I wonder if you could just speak about to what you're seeing right now in your areas of Tennessee, and we'll start with Josh.
Well, unfortunately, Tennessee is a little bit behind the ball when it comes to, or behind the curve, I guess, when it comes to reform of these things. I'll let Stacy speak to the death penalty parts of this because it's very relevant right now, and we're unfortunately making a lot of news in Tennessee recently. But overall criminal justice and sentencing and our prison populations and the way that we approach these problems hasn't changed a lot since the 80s and 90s, which were the decades where we really kind of put the gas pedal down on these policies of mass incarceration, things like 3 strikes and you're out, things like mandatory minimums, all the war on drugs, the things that we've all heard about over the last several years that drove prison populations in this country to levels that had never been seen in the history of the world. And they remain higher than any other country by far today. But what we've seen across the country is states deciding in some places because there's a moral imperative to not do that. And then in other places, there's a financial imperative not to do that. And so we've seen states as different as California and Texas reduce prison populations significantly, maybe for different reasons. But this experiment is a failed one. And unfortunately, states throughout the South are some of the last to sort of admit that. And so in Tennessee, our correction budget continues to grow. We have a $1 billion Department of Correction budget. And where I am in Memphis, our jail population just is stubbornly high for a city of our size when crime rates actually are trending downward. And so Tennessee's unfortunately not been on the forefront of that type of reform. We've had some victories here and there, but it's nowhere near where we need to be. And we're spending way too much money and destroying way too many lives and communities with these policies.
And Stacy?
Yeah, I mean, it's a nice segue because so many of the things that Josh just named. I mean, obviously the death penalty is just one more piece of the whole criminal legal system. And so all of the things that Josh mentioned about communities being decimated and the trauma that's inflicted, it carries on through into the death penalty. Again, as Josh mentioned, nationally, we're seeing some real positive signs with the death penalty. I mean, unfortunately, we have had the federal executions that did start rather quickly. But in terms of the states, we now have 32 states that have either ended the death penalty or have not used the death penalty in over 10 years. Colorado was the most recent state. It became the 22nd to completely get rid of the death penalty. We're seeing polling that says 60% of Americans now favor alternatives to the death penalty. That's a huge change from the 80s and 90s, that period Josh was talking about when we saw such a punitive response to everything in terms of criminal justice. So we're seeing good trends. And even in Tennessee, where we have resumed executions, we have had 2 new death sentences since 2013. Only 2. Now that's 2 too many, but that is a huge drop in death sentencing over from historic numbers. And what that tells me is that juries are really thinking twice about giving the death penalty. So what we are seeing, I think, is that in Tennessee, though there are really positive trends, the one thing that we obviously are doing that is not positive is we have resumed executions. And we're one of the few states to be actively executing. Thankfully, though COVID has been a tragedy and continues to be a tragedy on so many levels, thankfully our governor did act and our court to postpone 3 of the executions that were scheduled in Tennessee for this year. We do still have another, a case out of Shelby County where Josh is, a case that includes racial bias issues, that includes a man with intellectual disability issues that's never been considered by the courts, and possible innocence with untested DNA and newly discovered evidence. That man's name is Purvis Payne, and he has a December execution date. But we do believe that the public is hearing about this in a different way right now, thanks to people like Brian Stevenson and Just Mercy and the great education that is going on. And we think that with continued lifting up of these issues, we can make changes here in Tennessee too.
Yeah, and you mentioned the racial disparity, and the person who was also had a history of mental illness. And I wonder if y'all could speak to, and Kuntrell said this a lot within his story and with his closing remarks, that the systemic racism that is within these systems that continue to perpetuate racism, but were really in some ways mass incarceration and the death penalty done intentionally as ways to perpetuate racism and killing our Black and brown siblings. So I'm wondering if you can speak more towards that from your experience as well, because many people who may be watching this may not really get that yet, which to us may be maybe plain as day in a lot of our eyes, but enlightening people to that kind of, that there really is a systemic racism problem within our incarceration system. And Josh, maybe we can start with you speaking to that a little bit.
Yeah, sure. I mean, it is very clear to people like me and Stacy, maybe, who work in this sector and have been for a long time, and I think it's easier to discuss in the South, frankly, the tie to the institution of slavery, which ties very directly to the foundations of this country. I mean, this country was able to grow in the way that it did through its first 150 years because labor was owned, and we didn't have to pay labor. And particularly in the South, we built up wealth that accumulated in the hands of white people. And the biggest threat to that wealth and that power that was being accumulated through the first century or so of this country's existence, the biggest threat was that labor would not be free anymore, that the Black and brown bodies that were owned would be free. And before that was even a consideration, if they got away, if they escaped, if they believed in themselves that they had the power to rise up against what was usually a smaller complement of white people, those were huge risks. And so the things that we see today in modern policing, the things that we see today in the modern carceral state are very directly connected to that idea, to the idea that freedom for Black people represented a threat to white power and white wealth. And that is not an indictment of white people today necessarily, but it is an indictment of our country and how we refuse to still to this day address that and admit to that as the so-called original sin of this country. We have not asked for repentance from that original sin. And it is as true today as it ever has been, that this country was built on that idea, and we fight to this day to protect it. And so, and to put even more detail on that, I guess, when slavery finally was ended, we ended up in the South, especially, with rules and laws like sharecropping and the Jim Crow laws that followed, and then redlining that followed that. All of these are systemic, institutionally approved things that we put in place to maintain that power, to maintain that privilege as white people, as a white-led, as a predominantly white country for most of that time. And maybe still today. I don't want to get into demographics, but and in the 70s and 80s, when this criminal justice system began to really take root in its current form, it was as a result of the successes and victories of the civil rights movement in the 60s. And so there's just a very clear line across the history of this nation that ties into these issues of wealth and white wealth and control of Black bodies. And looking at the criminal legal system that we have in this country today and the way that it's implemented, there's just very little argument that I can buy into that is not true.
Mm-hmm.
And we have to address that. I mean, I'm working day in and day out in a small place in the middle of all this, and we're making small differences. This is a massive problem. And the country is at a really great point right now to begin to talk about it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I'll just, again, piggyback, because this is totally related, and the death penalty is obviously linked right in there with this idea that, you know, our history is based on that some lives matter more than other lives. And the early abolitionists who worked against slavery also were against capital punishment for that very reason, because of this sense that you're saying some life is intrinsically worth more. And we see, you know, Equal Justice Initiative that's been brought up many times during our conversation, but some of the research I've seen that they've done shows that between the late 1800s and early 1900s, 80% of lynchings happened in the South, and 80% of executions since the early 70s to today have happened in the exact same region. And that's not an accident, right? There are these direct ties. And so we see race playing out specifically in the death penalty in a variety of ways. There's disproportionate numbers of Black and brown people on death row. In Tennessee, we have about 17% of our population is Black, and 50% of our death row is. We see race playing out in the race of the victim of the crime. You have about 75% of those on death row in this country are there for the murder of a white person, even though white people only make up about half of all homicide victims. So again, it's that whole question of whose life matters. And then we see race in an interesting, and this comes up in a case in Tennessee. It's a case of a man named Abu Ali Abdul Rahman. But this notion that today we see a lot of this racial bias going on in the jury process and in how prosecutors use, not all, but some, use race to try to stack juries to get convictions and harsher sentences. And so what we see, we've seen it in some cases that have gone before the U.S. Supreme Court. We see it in this case of Abu Ali, is where a prosecutor intentionally and illegally dismissed qualified African-American jurors from serving on that jury with the intent of getting a conviction and a death sentence for this man. That is illegal. It's unconstitutional, and yet it happens, and it continues to happen. And these are the kinds of things that we have to address. And I'm hoping, like Josh said, we're in a moment right now when we are, I think, particularly as white Americans, more aware, and if we're not, we sure as heck need to be, about how this system is so intrinsically racist. And we have to deal with that on all these different levels, because we're just going to continue to see injustice after injustice after injustice if we don't.
Yeah, thank you, Stacy. And I want to go back to a point that Josh made. You touched on it lightly, but then you called it out, and I want to bring light to that. In your first opening remarks, you said what's going on is, immoral. It's a moral issue, and very much so. We try to politicicize it and make it an issue of right and not right. It should be right and wrong, but Republican Democrats, and that's not the case. But you also further down called it out as a sin. As people of faith, and Leah told me that you both are believers, so I can ask you. What is our mandate on taking action against the death penalty and mass incarceration?
I didn't go to seminary like maybe some people are.
That is okay. God uses all of us to speak.
That's right.
I think it doesn't matter if you're Christian or if you're Muslim, if you're Jewish, if you have a faith, the major religions of this world all have very, very similar concepts, especially around this theme of restoration and redemption. And it's fundamental to the human existence, I believe, no matter if I believe in Jesus Christ or if I believe in Muhammad. These teachings are all very familiar to us as humans. And if we do have a faith, we feel it, we know it, we follow it, we pursue it, we want to know more about it. And we claim our institutions represent it. And in fact, in the criminal legal system, when we wrote the very laws, the code that we study in law school, it says, that there are two purposes for this group of laws that we're going to make. And one is to hold people accountable. We would call it punishment in the law probably, but to hold people accountable for behavior that is dangerous or damaging, and then to rehabilitate, then to bring people back to shalom, back to restoration with their community. It's stated. We say it because of the kinds of people who created this country and continue to build this democracy. And so it's baked in there. It's written in there. But I would I guess, argue that this is one of the more difficult things we do as people of faith or just people is deal with the anger and the rage and the fear that crime, that dangerous, violent behavior can bring out in us. And so we have long ago drifted into punishment solely, and the punitive nature of this system is really should just be gut-wrenching, I think, to any person who ascribes to any major religion and has heard this restoration and redemption message, because there's precious little redemption. It takes a person like Brian Stevenson and EJI, potentially a modern day saint, to get Kuntrell any sort of justice, right? It took luck that they got connected, and then a lot of hard work from a lot of really smart people to get him back to shalom with his community. And it is just not happening on a systemic level. We do not treasure it in our systems like we should, and we have to inject that into these things if we want to change it.
And I'll just say too, I could talk theology for a while, but I will, unless there's a specific thing, I won't go down that road. Or
you preached it, Stacy. You preach it.
I can bring it. But I will say, to Josh's point about the fear, and I mean, particularly around the death penalty, I mean, there's some really horrible, horrible crimes that happen, and people who lose loved ones to homicide, particularly in these brutal ways, it is beyond traumatic. It is horrific. And we're all outraged by it. We're, hurt by it. And we should be. This is unacceptable behavior, obviously. But I would argue that if you look at the death penalty system, and I'm specifically going to talk about the death penalty system, what we do in this system currently, what I see and what I hear from these families who are trapped in it is that there is nothing healing. There is nothing that is helping them deal with the trauma that has been inflicted, that it is all about seeking a sentence for this person for 30 years. And their needs and their struggles and their community's needs and struggles get lost in the shuffle. And it seems to me, and this gets back to this restorative piece, rather than spending all of our energy and resources pursuing a death sentence for 30 years, and a death sentence that may not even happen for a lot of different reasons, can we think about this in a different way and instead focus that energy, focus those resources on dealing with the trauma these families are going through, dealing with trauma in our communities that have all sorts of needs. We heard Kuntrell sharing what some of those needs are in our communities, the poverty, the violence that people are living with every day. How can we use that energy and those resources there, right? Still hold people accountable, but move toward a system that is restoring and that is healing and not punishing and destroying.
Yeah, and I think for many people, I mean, and I can speak to the Christian perspective in that, I mean, we worship a Savior who was convicted by the state wrongfully, and who was put to death by the state by their death penalty, hanging on the cross.
Right.
And so I do think that this conversation, to where in my experience and growing up in rural South Carolina, where I saw a lot of people of faith just on the front lines of for the death penalty. There were proponents of it, and then worshiping a God who was a part of that and was killed by that. Is something that I don't necessarily think is said enough, and so I just wanted to lift that up too. Is that within the tradition of Christianity, that is really intertwined into our narrative, and for it to be something that we aren't speaking out about is just really interesting to me because of the connection it really does have to our faith as Christians. And so I just wanted to throw that out there for.
I'll throw this out there just for what it's worth, because it's been really helpful to me. And obviously, as we all know, different Christian denominations have different positions on the death penalty. Though for those of us who certainly do see it as a faith issue and don't understand how you can square the death penalty with the life and death of Jesus, there are sisters and brothers who have different beliefs about that, as Lee just said. And so one of the things that I try to find those stories or those examples in Scripture that help us think about this maybe in a new way or frame it in a different way, so that all of us can kind of chew on that together. And one of those stories is obviously the story with the woman caught in adultery from John's Gospel. And I've always, and a mentor of mine reframed it for me, and so I just put it out there as something that people can think about when, she's brought in a very legal, systemic way. She is brought before Jesus by those who are ready to cast judgment upon her and who have the legal authority to do that. It's not mob violence. I mean, but they have the legal authority, and they say to Jesus, "What shall we do with her?" And as we know in the famous scriptural quote, he looks up and says, "You who are without sin, cast the first stone." And what is so helpful to me about that is, for Jesus, the question in that moment is not, does this woman deserve to die? Right? That's not what he's primarily concerned about. Because if you look at the law, you can make the case that she could be deserving of death. That's not his concern. His concern is, do those holding the stones deserve to kill her? We get into this sense as people of faith, humility and our own need for mercy and grace in our lives every day. And how do we continue to hold people accountable? He tells her, go and sin no more, right? There's accountability, but there is mercy. And there is a sense of humility. And that, to me, is something that's really helped me as I think about these questions, to think about how can we reframe these issues to think about this in a different way. And that has helped me. So I just throw it out there.
Thank you. And as you may or may not know, Just Talk Live was started to reach the masses, but most importantly, young adults. And as you see in our news and media today, young adults are taking action. They are hungry to get involved. And it goes past, the protests in the street. They want to be more engaged. And what better experts than two people who are doing the on-the-ground work and really involved in changing the system. So what, resources or ways for young adults that can get involved in the death penalty, changing that, and also mass incarceration, or even your two programs that you have right now?
Well, I'll just jump in, and then Josh can follow. Obviously, our organization, Tennesseans for Alternatives to the Death Penalty, we have a website, TennesseeDeathPenalty.org. We are on Twitter, we're on Instagram, we're on Facebook, so anybody can find us and link in and start learning about things that they can be doing. We're here in Tennessee, but there are groups like us all over the country. And so there's also a resource called Death Penalty Information Center. which is just a great warehouse of information that you can learn more and find different groups out there to connect to. So yeah, I mean, I can't say enough about, and we know this about social media and the way that it has changed organizing and getting the word out, particularly about, whether it be legislation or a particular case, or, that is so critical, and young people are so good at it. And I wish I could consider myself a young person these days, but I'm not, and I'm not good at it. But
you're young at heart. You're young at heart.
I'm young at heart. There you go, Lee. Thank you. Anyway, but I think that's such a great way. Just share. Get that information out there, because that's how this stuff takes off, and how those in power and policymakers are held accountable and can't run and hide. So I would say check out Tennesseans for Alternatives to Death Penalty, DPIC, Death Penalty Information Center, and social media. Go crazy. That's that.
And I talk about the front door to all of this, which is jails, which is local jails, and the system that we use in most communities to determine who stays in jail and who doesn't while their case works its way through the system. And that is money bail. That is a price tag that most local criminal justice systems use to determine how much is going to cost for you to get out of jail while you're working to defend yourself against charges from the state. And it's a wholly corrupt system. It doesn't perform as it's supposed to, which is to keep us safe, number one, from people who may have committed violent acts, and also to keep people who are charged with any crime from fleeing the accountability that we want them to face. But money has nothing to do with that. And so in most communities across the country, if we have folks from around the country, then you're probably you may live in a town with a bail fund, a community bail fund, or you're close by. And community bail funds are the most, accessible way to really disrupt this front door to our criminal legal system. You can do it with a donation to your local community bail fund. Just City happens to have one that we would love a donation to, but there are dozens and dozens of these funds now across the country. And often where you find a bail fund, you will find a group of activists who are actually doing something to change this instead of just bailing people out. It's a really great tool for advocacy in this criminal legal system, because you can actually purchase people's freedom, which has a long history in this country, by the way, back to slavery. And you can help a person and their family, but you're also proving the point that this is a ridiculous, inefficient, expensive, destructive way of figuring out who stays in our system and who doesn't. And I would say, get into the streets. I mean, this is coming from a guy who has not gotten into the streets over the past few months. But if young adults are out there, I mean, John Lewis just passed away, and John Lewis was arrested dozens of times, including as a sitting member of Congress. And if there was ever a time in our lives where you need to be out in front of your own house or in front of City Hall saying the truth that you believe, I think now is the time. The bail fund will bail you out, right? That's another great thing about bail funds, is that these bail funds across the country, more than 70 of them, they're ready to bail out protesters who might get arrested, and they'll pay whatever it takes to get you out. So it is a really prime moment right now in this country. And as much as I hate to see the destruction and sometimes the violence that happens, we have to keep our voices raised and keep them loud, because we have an opportunity, especially moving into what is hopefully a transitional time in our federal government. We have an opportunity to make our voices heard, because the things that are happening in our names in many, many, many communities across this country are not reflective of our values as a country, no matter what denomination, no matter what our faith. And so I just encourage, if you're young and have some energy, get out there and also follow Just City on social media too. You can find all of our handles at our website, justcity.org. You can see what we've been up to since COVID. We've bailed out more than 150 people, trying to get them out of the jail to keep them safe. We've also filed a lawsuit against our local jail with the ACLU. And so we're doing things with that money that I think is useful, and we're telling stories on social media. So visit us there too at justcity.org.
And I'm going to jump in one last thing. I told you if you wind me up, it's hard to. But I'm going to piggyback on what Kuntrell said earlier, which is about voting, and paying attention locally to local elections. Those matter so much. I mean, just do a little bit of your homework, find out the policies of the people on the ballot, and if you align yourself with the things that you've heard during this conversation, then figure out who those people are and vote. That's, all of this is all connected. So I just want to put one more plug in for voting.
Yeah, and actually we are connected to the Presbyterian Church. We're very ecumenical in this space, but there are a lot of Presbyterian policy that speaks out against the death penalty and systemic racism. Yep. So if you are a minister, if you are a person in the Presbyterian Church, I would encourage you to look at that policy. It can be found in actually just Google it. Just Google PCUSA criminal justice policy, and you will find it.
Yes.
And that will give you permission to really begin these conversations, because these are conversations for people of faith to be having.
Yep.
And we as a denomination stand by those values and those morals and that policy. So that is out there. And also the Presbyterian Church is a big proponent of ending cash bail, right, Destiny? We have a campaign for that. It's one of the things that our church is really active in, and it's very easy to sign up to do that. You can even just let it. What I do is it just automatically drafts out of my account to continue that ministry in those ways. So things are out there, and yes, we cannot stress voting enough. Mm-hmm. Vote and
wash your hands and wear a mask.
Yeah, wash your hands, wear a mask, and vote.
That's right.
It is very important. But thank y'all so much for being here with us. We hope that whoever is watching this has gotten a little bit of education and a little bit of fire under them. As my grandma used to say, she said something else, but that is the version that we can say on live social media. Got a little fire under them. But we want to thank our guests for being here. Thank y'all so much. And Destiny, did you have any last words?
Yeah, thank you, Stacy and Josh, for coming on. Thank you for being not only the gatekeeper of those stories, but sharing them with the community, as we know that's the only real way that we influence the hearts to make change, to change the policies, and to see the change in the communities that we are serving. So thank you so much for coming on. Again, as we offer to Kuntrell, if there's anything that Lee and I can do for you, let us know. But I just want to thank you for being the hands and feet on the ground, especially on this issue that has affected people who look like me. So thank you.
Thank you, Destiny. And thank you, Lee. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
And until next week, we will see you same time, same place. And so we will see you then. So till next week.
Bye.
Bye.